Welcome to the Dr. G Show. It is 2020, which seems like forever since 1990. So apparently,
1990?
yeah, because like 90s, that's.
It's been
I always think it's the 90s still. So 2020 is huge. So I thought we were going to be flying around in George Jetson kind of space mobiles, but apparently that's not going to happen. So make sure you guys share this. And this is our first episode of the year. And today, this month on Dr. G Show, we'll be talking about kind of food sensitivity stuff, some specific things like gluten, and then we'll probably talk about gluten, and then we'll probably talk about casein and whey also. And hey, there's Linda. So I want you guys to ask lots of questions, and I know some of you guys watch this offline. Still ask your questions, and we'll try to get the information. So we want to talk about more than you've ever wanted to know about gluten, and it's probably the most common question that people have. And even there's lots of good books on it, but in the end, it's kind of like, what the hell does that all mean? And so today we also have our guest, Sherry Clark, who's a registered nurse. She's a certified health coach, and she's been kind of practicing side by side and independently for like ever with us. Yeah?
8 years.
8 years. So 8 years.
No, longer.
Is that right?
It's 2020. That'd be 9 years.
Holy crap, 9 years.
Yeah.
So for almost a decade, really kind of helping patients and clients from actually all around the world reverse acute and chronic conditions naturally, just bad lifestyle medicine through kind of teaching people what we did to screw stuff up and then helping them to stop screwing stuff up so their physiology can work, because genetically we're designed to heal, physiologically we're designed to heal. It is usually what the hell are we doing to mess it up. So feel free to post your questions as we go through this, and
Yep, that's helpful.
yeah, and then we'll probably go through and answer most of your questions anyways, but still feel free to post those. So we'll take turns, but you just pipe in whatever you want, because I'm a media whore, so like I just talk too much.
I'll try to get a word in edgewise.
So the first thing is, what the hell is gluten? And it's kind of interesting because like the monks are the ones who discovered gluten. Did you know this?
I did not know that.
All right. So they would wash their grains, and then they would come up with this kind of gooey substance that kind of imitated the texture of meat. So then the monks, since they're vegetarians, started making like, vegan duck and vegan pork and vegan whatever.
Like Seitan.
Yes. Satan. It's Satan.
Seitan.
Seitan?
Yes.
Yeah. Never have Satan for dinner. That's gluten-free, right? Yeah. So, Satan. Satan. Never have Satan.
It's Asian, right?
I know.
I don't know. I don't speak very much
No,
Asian.
Satan? No, Satan's, it's...
Seitan, I think that's it.
Yeah, it's just good gluten...
It's gluten
protein,
mashed together,
yeah.
and people use it for...
Making gross stuff.
Vegan protein.
So then, that worked out really well. But then... For a while.
For the ones that survived.
And then today, for the last 10,000 years, we've been growing grain. So wheat, all these different varieties of wheat. There's a good book called The History of Food, and talks about the 20 major changes we've had in the last 100 years with our food industry, which was a really amazing read. But one of the things they talked about was grain. And like we in the US, so we're all a bunch of immigrants, and the immigrants would bring their specific grains over. And we're Kansas, so we are Mennonite country here, which was what kind of grain? Do you know?
Red turkey.
Hell yeah, she'd be knowing. So red, I did not know that. I knew it was red something.
Mennonite.
Red turkey. So red turkey was a specific type, and different types of grains would be used for different types of things. The best grain you could ever get was the most, so your bread dough and your pizza dough and your cake dough and your cooked dough, they wouldn't be the same grains because they have different properties. Kind of like phyllo dough is very, very different. Like they can, did you know they stretch phyllo dough? A ball of dough, 27 square feet. That's insane.
But do you know why turkey red wheat became so popular?
Why is that?
Because it's a winter wheat, so they could plant it in the fall, and it would grow, and then kind of not do so well, and then start regrowing again when it became spring, and then it was able to be harvested early in the summer, and it wasn't as susceptible to drought as the spring wheats, which are softer and are more popular to be grown, like in the North Dakota area, the northern, where it's colder. So for this area, the red turkey was really, it increased the production of wheat, and it made it much better for the farmers.
Yeah, and you can have winter bread, winter wheat, right? Or no?
No.
The harvest in spring?
You harvest in the spring, but it was more the production.
They just call it winter wheat?
Well, because it's in the ground in the winter.
Oh, okay. All right. So, for 10,000 years, we've been doing the same thing with the same kind of grains. And then we got a better idea.
Well,
all right.
They didn't wait for 10,000 years to start modifying wheat. They were constantly crossing and recrossing, to make the protein level higher, to make the bread that you made with it finer, and so we went from 14 chromosomes to 28.
Yeah.
So it's like radically different at a cellular level than the grains that were grown, even the wheat type grains that were grown in biblical times.
Yeah. So, and that's one of those things of we've created these monstrosities that never existed, and then we have this evolution of immune systems that are passed on from every mom since Eve, and then we create this new thing, and it's just like our immune system, I don't know what the hell that thing is, right? Protein-wise, it's different,
Because most of the change has really occurred since World War II.
Yeah. And the gluten, just, if you have a hard time trying to figure out, I mean, it's a protein, but think of it like gluten is the glue that binds bread together, so when the yeast eats the sugar, it creates all these bubbles and gases, and then it makes big, large, fluffy bread.
Well, what the gluten does is it allows those bubbles to stretch really big so that it can rise more. It's not a flat bread, but Wonder Bread.
Yeah.
And it holds those bubbles so they don't collapse.
Yeah.
If you ever tried to make gluten-free bread, that's why it's hard, because it doesn't have that.
Small bits. Like you actually get special pans that are smaller because they're not like the modern stuff. And that's where some people, especially as we go through this, people are like, well, what can I eat that's like it? Well, you don't want to eat anything that's like the stuff that's causing you problems in the first place, right? So, yeah. So anyways, there's 3 main proteins that we'll talk a little bit about this time. And, you guys probably know that there's gluten, gliadin, and glutenomorphin, which is morphine. There's literally morphine in your bread, which is why we call it comfort food. But you guys are just a bunch of drug addicts, and when life sucks, I just need a free base. I just need a little fix. Can't just get a little bit of morphine in my bread, right? So that's why I switched to crack instead of bread, because I'm not going to play the morphine game. Yeah? Did you do that too?
No, I'm trying to go crack-free.
Crack-free. So when life sucks, people tend to eat comfort foods, which is bread, because of that. But the other 3 proteins that are more significant for like allergens are the gluten, and then we also have the globulin, which you even make globulins, and albumins, and you make albumins. So kind of round proteins, flat proteins. But those that are altered can cause catastrophic problems with our immune system. And so like that kind of old school, like, well, my grandma and great-grandpa, they ate bread and they were fine. Well, their bread is not your bread. And the bread I grew up with is not the same as the new bread that's come out. Like, it is radically changed, and it has just created catastrophic storm of autoimmune conditions with that.
And there are other things in our environment which have also changed, which impact our immune system, which make us less able to tolerate, even if we could go back to 1940 and eat that bread.
Yeah.
If we were doing it in our time, we would still have more problems than they did, although the problems that, in the ways that we've changed wheat, are probably the biggest issue.
Yeah, they probably ate a lot more real food, which kind of helps balance stuff out a little bit. And then the average
There
American
was
now,
no McDonald's.
right? Yeah, the average American now eats one fruit or vegetable a day, and almost everything's processed. So, like, you take the weakest possible immune system, and then try to monkey with it, and it's
Yeah.
way worse. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
But
So-
we're here to talk about what we can do,
So, do you
About it.
want to talk about what changed, the kind of technical stuff,
the technical
the
stuff about
farming
what
and all
changed.
that, or you want me to?
Well, you talk, I'll jump in.
All right. So, you know, often I give these lectures called Food is Medicine, and we talk about, you know, all these things that have radically changed that they were very rare things and sudden epidemics of these diseases, right? And we know, like Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel, lots and lots of gut stuff in the beginning. Those became epidemics in 1950. And that's because everything radically changed with grains, especially in 1950. So a couple things is, you know, as we look at farming in America, the goal is to say, what can we do, not what should we do. Can we take gasoline and make flavors and preservatives out of it and feed you and your children that and cause cancer? Sure. Will we make more profit? Hell yeah. Should we do that? Absolutely not.
Well,
right?
or do we even know that it's going to cause a problem? I think most farmers, you know, are...
She's trying to protect herself because she's a Mennonite. She lives in Newton, and it's all farmers.
No, I'm not trying to protect myself. I just know the farmers.
They're going to come get you tonight.
They want to help feed the world, and so they're focused on how we can do that.
Right. Yeah.
And,
Okay. Yeah.
And
right.
the people that are bringing forth the new techniques, I would say the new techniques, and then that are going to change the grains or the vegetables or any other agricultural crop. The results of those changes are never tested on humans to see how they affect our physiology and our disease process. And so it's really not the farmer's fault. It's the, it's the science.
I hate farmers.
It's probably, if we really want to lay blame, it's probably those chemical companies.
Yes, I agree. Everybody's on board with that. Nobody's like, oh wait, Monsanto, come on, right?
Right.
Well, you know what's funny is even like flavor safe tomatoes, those came out in the 90s, I believe, and they were genetically modified tomatoes to have, like, they wouldn't rot, they wouldn't go bad. And so they were great. Then you had more profitability, you had increased productions, but flavor safe tomatoes literally killed people that ate it. It disrupted their bacteria so much, it actually caused toxins that then killed them, kind of like how C. diff will kill you. Or how, like, if we feed cows corn, we disrupt their bacteria and we create an overgrowth of E. coli 0157H7, and then that straight up kills people, kills children every year.
And cows, actually, if they weren't butchered right away.
That's right, because they don't live they don't live long enough to figure that out.
They have about a
Yeah.
6-month lifespan.
Yeah.
If they were to stay in a feedlot.
That's right. So, as Americans, we're always hitting the bullseyes on the wrong target. It's never what should we do, it's always what can we do. And that becomes the frustration. So the two biggest things, or three biggest things that we do that cause this epidemic of especially gluten problem is one, monocropping. Because like we said before, there used to be lots of different grains, and they would use different grains and different mixes for different things. And they were all ancient grains, so that was cool. But America is, let's like make one of everything. There's 300 species of bananas. Let's make every single human in this country eat one species. And if there's any kind of issue, you're just screwed, right? Same with mangoes, same with avocados. There's all these, but the goal is what travels the best, what grows the best, so we can make the most money possible out of that. And that then dramatically decreases the genetic variance that we have available to us. So monocropping is a big one, because then we really went to triticum grain. So out of all these different grains, we said everybody in America will eat one grain. And then we messed with that grain. So we changed our production. In 1970, there was the introduction of the steel roller mill. And so again, 1950s is when, is that right? Yeah, well, let's back up. We'll go farming first. In 1950, farming practices radically changed. In fact, Norman Borlaug, sounds like a horror movie, but Borlaug, he was the father of this new movement, and he actually won a Nobel Peace Prize, because the whole goal, just like Sherry was saying, was we're going to do this righteous thing and feed the world, right?
And that's a good goal.
Yeah, that is. So, what they did was they created new technology. So we changed the seeds, we changed the pesticides, we changed the insecticides and fertilizers to make higher yields, right? Mm-hmm. So then we were like, if we could just make more and be more productive, we could feed the entire world. Now, what you guys need to know too is, if you don't know this already, food production throws away more food than what's required to even feed the entire population of the world. So there's like great things like standardization of like bananas. I don't know, do you know this? Mm-hmm. Like they all have to be a certain size. So then they just throw all these huge things of bananas out if they're too small or too big, or if they don't fit that thing, or if they don't pack very well. If they're irregular sizes, that doesn't pack. We want every apple to look exactly the same size, every orange, every tomato, everything. And then all they do is dump all the rest and bury it over. And it's crazy. We waste all that food. So like in France, they passed the ugly food laws, and so they can't do that anymore. So, or they, I don't know if they can, but they're doing less of it. So Borlaug, they created new hybrid seeds, and tell us about the grain. So it used to be like, what, 6 foot?
Okay, if you read Little House on the Prairie, they got lost in the grain because it was 6 feet tall.
Really?
Yes.
Well, that's awesome. Okay. I didn't...
And so to make the grain produce more grain and less stalk, they hybridized and hybridized and hybridized until it became shorter and shorter and shorter. And they're probably more efficient at hybridizing with chemical advances and better microscopes and all that kind of stuff. So after 1950, they just kept hybridizing. But so every time so now it's knee high or however tall. Okay. And a little bit.
So from like 6 foot to about 2 or 3 foot.
Yeah, something like that. But the reason they were doing that is so that there would be more protein. There would be more gluten in each kernel of grain, because the more gluten it had, the better bread it made. The high gluten flour makes better bread.
It made lighter and fluffier bread, which is more profitable because you have to use less grains to make the same loaf.
Well, and everybody wants the best light fluffy rolls for their dinner party.
That's right.
So you buy the flour that gives you that.
Yeah.
And so the housewife was thrilled. And nobody was testing to know that, oh, well, we're getting a lot more tummy aches, the kids are having this and that, and everybody's going to the doctor, and we don't know, maybe it's, eventually they just call it IBS or whatever, and, there were increasing problems all along, but it wasn't recognized as being caused by the food.
So, that high-speed stainless steel mill, it got so good that it could, no, we're back to farming. We gotta go back to farming.
Farming?
Because we're back in 1950. The seeds, so with the seeds then, the hybrid seeds, so we grow smaller, more gluten per, right? And then they said, what if we produce more fertilizer in PK? And so again, it's a whole thing. Like, you don't have to give nutrients to weeds. Weeds grow like wildfire. And the reason is because there's these mucal threads fungal threads. Fungal threads that in 1 little inch of soil, 1 inch, there's 7 miles of these. And those fungal threads go down, I think, 30 to 60 feet deep. And they find all the nutrients and water to deliver to all the trees and plants and flowers above. That's why nobody has to till the field to get a bunch of weeds to grow.
Or wild grass.
Or wild grass, any of that stuff. Like, it all takes care of itself. But what we did, again, was grind everything under, and then that destroys those, so crops didn't grow very well. So what's the least thing that we could give them? Let's give them NPK. And then, of course, the nitrogen in that actually causes cancer and has all kinds of horrible detriments to us. But then they just started like heavily dosing the fields with that, and then just tearing them up, and it basically creates that to where we get no-till eventually, and people figure this out. But
it decreases the nutrition in the
that's
food.
right. That's right. Because if you're feeding it, you don't have those fungal threads. So then that nutritional content that was this
Right.
this
all
complex.
It's getting is potassium, nitrogen, and
Sodium. No. NPK. Nitrogen, potassium, that's K. P is phosphorus.
phosphorus. I'm sorry, I should know. But anyway, that's what the plant's getting, and it's not getting all the other good stuff that's
Yeah.
in the soil that those threads translate into the root threads, root fibers, and
Yeah, and that plant is all the nutrition from the ground, right? So less nutrition in the ground, less nutrition in the plant. Your body, 100 trillion cells, every single one came from food you ate. So if there's less nutrition in the ground, there's less in the plant, there's less in you, and then you start aging faster, healing slower, dying
And
of more complicated things.
the plant itself is more susceptible to insect damage and fungal damage, rust, and all that. And so then they have to apply chemicals to keep the bugs away and the rust from destroying the plant and whatever else, mold, and
Yeah.
so you get a lot more chemicals, which aren't good for us either.
So that introduces our 2 biggest chemical polluters of the world, Monsanto and DuPont, which there's just a movie about DuPont. Dark Waters, did you see it?
I haven't seen it.
I didn't see it either. We need to start, I think at OptiLife, a book and movie club, and start watching all these documentaries.
Well, these are fun. Let's do that.
Hell yeah. I'll be watching a movie. I'm from Texas, you know I can't read a book. Just get books
That's
with lots of
scary.
pictures,
You
you
don't
know?
read books.
So our 3 things, right, that radically changed our gut problems is 1, monocropping, so we then have only these antigen problems, or these glutens. And then we changed the farming in 1950, and that's when we saw the surge of IBS, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis. And then we added pesticides, herbicides, and all those pesticides, because you said we made weaker immune systems because we give less nutrition to the plant, we share the same physiological pathways as plants and bugs. Any chemical used to harm them harms us. And I do my little 1 to 2, 3 mile walk or jog or run or half-assing mostly every morning, but not for the last month or so. But there's cornfields around where I walk. And what's funny is, I mean, literally everything's dead except for these corn. And so I'm like, every other bug share the same same physiology I do. All those other plants share the same physiology I do, which means every time I eat those chemicals, I suffer the same fates as those things. And so again, like you said, we don't test it on people. We don't see what the hell's going to go wrong with this situation.
Well, we could open a whole nother can of worms. You're talking about the cornfields.
Oh, the GMOs?
Well, they've been genetically modified so that they can spray
Spray
the
poison.
glyphosate so that the corn is the only thing that's not susceptible to that.
Yeah, think about that.
Except it's not working very well anymore.
No, they spray a poison that kills every living thing except for this one seed. And they spray that, and it goes into the neighborhoods, into the water, and it's a mess. So that's the farming aspect. And then there's the technology aspect, right? So the technology one is they created in 1970 these steel mills, right? And they used to use these not concrete, stone mills.
Stone.
And stone milling made kind of like, you think like steel cut oats. It like made kind of chunky, more kind of fibers. But now with this new technology, we could take the most dense grain and just pulverize it to just dust, pull away all the vitamins, minerals, nutrients, all the fiber, all the good stuff, mostly brands, germs, all the oils and stuff, and then only create this dust that's left. And then that became
white dust.
White dust. And that became your all-purpose flour. And so suddenly we could eat the most fine flours ever that they usually make cakes out of. Now I can make rolls out of cake. I can make cake out of cake. I can make cookies out of cake. I can make pizza crust out of cake. And people love that because that is so pulverized that it becomes instant sugar.
And it rises really well.
Yeah. So that's great again for that idea, but should we be doing that? No, because we get rid of all the nutrition. And then they bleach it with
it's not white enough.
bromine. And as you guys, if you've heard our talks before about thyroid, iodine is what builds your thyroid. There's tyrosine, and there's 3 iodines, and that's T3 that runs every single thing in your body from your brain to your metabolic rate and everything. But bromine from that flour can now bind to that iodine receptor, and it makes you dumb, fat, and sick, but your labs look fine. So if you've ever went to the doctor and like look at your thyroid labs, you're like, yeah, you look fine, and you're just like, I can't function. Well, yeah, don't treat labs, treat patients. What the hell are they doing that might be causing that? But that brominated flour that's in wheat and white is so bad that in Singapore, you can get 12 years in prison and $500,000 fine for making that bread because it's so disruptive to people's health. And in other countries, the goal is don't make people sick, fat, and dumb.
You know, I think we're the only people that I've heard talk about this. Because it's bromine, and it's also the chlorine in our water, and it's also the fluoride in our toothpaste and our water, and all 3 of those things do the same thing.
Yep.
And it's typically 10 to 20 years to get diagnosed with a thyroid condition, and then when you do get diagnosed, they just give you more thyroid hormone. They don't ever tell you that it could be reversed or at least remediated. Right. And for instance, I have a thyroid condition, but I'm not on thyroid medication. And I've been told by my naturopath that I don't need to be on thyroid medication, and she couldn't believe that I was doing so well after so many years. She said it's like not usually seen at all. And I credit a lot of that to the fact that I'm not eating brominated flour, and I'm working really hard to keep the fluoride and chlorine out of my life too. So there's hope, guys. This is one little piece of the puzzle, but of thyroid, but it's the part of the puzzle of health.
And yours is hypo.
Yeah,
right?
I have Hashimoto's.
So,
I have.
Yeah.
You know,
So hers is maintained healthy through diet only, right?
yes.
So in grad school, I had the opposite. I had Graves' disease. And Graves' disease is autoimmune hyperthyroid.
Which is just kind of like your thyroid's going crazy one direction, but it might start going crazy the other direction and go back and forth. Some people have that. But we digress. We're supposed to be talking about gluten.
But my thyroid is all good.
Yeah.
I changed it with diet
Right.
and lifestyle. So
And did I. And so did I.
yeah. So there's hope out there, guys, for sure.
Yeah.
Just need someone that knows what the hell they're doing.
Yeah.
So, which I had another patient. They got put on thyroid, and the doctor was just like convinced them they had to get this thyroid, that their thyroid was so messed up. And so I'm looking through their labs. They didn't do any thyroid testing at all.
How did they know they...
They just said.
Oh, because you're cold and you're depressed and you're fat?
No, she was fine. She's healthy, energetic, but she was just like, I've been a little tired lately, and it's just like, oh, well, you need thyroid, so they give it to her. But it downregulates your own thyroid.
They don't usually do that.
Well, some do. All right, so John says, hey, Dr. G.
Hope your year's off to a great start.
Oh, okay.
He needs glasses.
I need glasses. It's so tiny and far away. All right. And then Kari Paul, who's awesome. Good to see you. So glad that Sherry's back working with you, Dr. Garrett. Yeah, it's awesome. Patients that come in, like sometimes when we shadow each other, they get 2-for-1 specials.
That's right. That's right. Oh, I miss seeing y'all. So I'm back.
Yes. So that still production basically gave all-purpose flour a longer shelf life. Right. So your flour is so nutritionally deficient that pests are unlikely to ever eat it. Now, when we were kids, we had Weebles, but I think we had a different type of grain when I was a kid. And so, because that was just when this stuff was changing.
Bugs will not eat sugar, typically. They know it's toxic, and they will typically not eat flour.
Yeah. There's
still protein in flour, but if there's any whole food around, they would rather have it. So.
Hey, there's Geraldine. Yeah, so in fact, I'd read that even pigs will not eat all-purpose flour, but they'll eat freshly milled grains.
Yeah.
So, so there's that, and then the other part to that too, with that, it gave it longer shelf life, which then again was like, oh, we're going to solve all the world's problems with this. But the new milling eliminated all the nutritional parts and gave it a longer shelf life. So now we had, and I love this, we have mutant seeds grown in synthetic soil, bathed in chemicals. It's pulverized to dust, the nutrition is removed, and then it's bleached with bromine, and then we're surprised that bread makes us sick. Like, that's what should happen.
One might think that is the problem, not the gluten in the bread. But we're going to talk more about gluten here in just a minute.
Yeah.
I mean, it's multifactorial. I mean, but the things we've talked about, about the farming practices and all that, that's true of all our food. So that's why we encourage you, to the best of your financial ability, to buy from a local farmer who knows what they're doing, or at the very least try to buy organic. At least it's not being doused in
a bunch of
chemicals.
Yeah.
One thing that some people don't ever think about is that when they make flour out of wheat, nobody washes off any of that chemicals before they start.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's really bad.
Yeah, they don't do. That's not on the Clean 15 Dirty Dozen. That's not. They don't even do flour, do they?
It's just vegetables and fruits.
That's some bull crap. So then it brings us to, okay, so that's the stuff that's changed. So that's what gluten is. That's how we've changed it. That's why when you hear people say, well, my grandma and my great-grandma used to eat bread and they were fine. Great, it's not the same thing, right? And
we're seeing a lot of gluten sensitivity in older people, even elderly people. My mother, in fact, she was in her 90s and just, started having problems with it. So even if you have managed to, survive, if you have any sensitivities at all, it's going to surface with what's going on with the food.
Yeah, any predisposition is going to be exploited. So then we have diseases. So then it's the outcome to this, right? And at the end, we're going to talk about solutions, but and some more of the caveats of this. But straight up diseases for this, the most common ones are things like celiac, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel, eczema, psoriasis. Again, those diseases, boom, went like that into epidemics. And then even rashes and asthma and allergies. So like a lot of those kids that have asthma and allergies, oh my gosh, it is so easily reversed because it's being caused. So especially when you think about these, not only are allergenic, but they're causing histamine reactions because of that immune reaction. So then you think about every histamine reaction in the body, and everything from migraines to skin to gut to it all can be caused by that. Any diseases that you'd had? What about the little bumps?
Oh,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
common.
there's an autoimmune disease that's associated with celiac disease, and I think it's separate from it, but often it's seen with celiac disease. It's called dermatitis herpetiformis. It's not a herpes disease. It just, the little bumps on typically hands
Yeah.
look like the blisters that you get from herpes.
Yeah.
But it's just, I have that. And so if I get gluten or I eat something that's cross-reactive with gluten, they appear within hours. And you can feel them and you can see them, and that's how I can tell if I've been glutened or not.
And you used to work at a
Oh,
making
yes.
bread?
I worked at a wonderful place called Prairie Harvest, and I used to be their bread baker long time ago before they moved to the beautiful building they're in now. And I did it all by hand. And so I baked bread on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I believe. And my hands were red, you know, clear up to here, because I was in the flour. I was kneading that flour by hand, the dough. And I used to bake bread every day. But I was red, and I noticed I would get better by Monday. And so I thought, well, it's got to be either the wheat, the flour, or maybe the yeast. And so I, you know, did some, this is long before I knew Dr. Garrett. I don't think he was even practicing in Newton at the time.
Wasn't even born.
No, not quite that long ago. But anyway, I baked bread for a while, but then I decided that I couldn't do that anymore. And as soon as I quit doing that, the red went away. But of course, I was still eating. I didn't know I had celiac disease, and so I was eating the grain. And so I always had this psoriasis, which was really the dermatitis herpetiformis, eczema, psoriasis, or whatever you want to call it. And my doctors had treated it for years and years. And they never had a clue, but as soon as I went gluten-free, it went away. So.
Yeah. And that's the really, I mean, since like changing to lifestyle medicine, right? Used to, I did what everybody else did, which was it's just manage it. Well, take these supplements, take these herbs, and just, how long do I have to take those for? Well, as long as you're causing the problem, you got to keep taking those for the rest of your life. And that whole lifestyle medicine coursework at Harvard was so different, because at Harvard, they were like, if you're, you know, the body's designed to heal, what are you doing to cause the problem? Teach people to stop causing the problem. And that literally like blew my mind. Like, I don't know why that's not taught in school. But really the practice is managers. Always manage.
Cortisone cream.
Right. And so, you know, you sit there and you work the flour, and then they say, well, it's you got dermatitis. And we
Put
get
cortisone on.
And yeah, just knock out the immune system. But nobody says what the hell's causing the problem.
Right. They didn't know. My doctor was concerned. He told me to quit using the cortisone cream, but I had such a problem that I couldn't, you know, but he didn't tell me. He had no idea. Just, you're defective.
You're broken. That's what everybody's broken. They're fine, and then suddenly they break as a population and become epidemic of this, and the next population breaks and becomes epidemic of that disease. But that's the simplicity of it.
Well, we've been talking about, I mean, we kind of jumped ahead and started talking about immune diseases, autoimmune diseases like celiac and this dermatitis herpetiformis. But there's such a thing as non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which many people that are sensitive to gluten have. And so with non-celiac gluten sensitivity, you can have the same symptoms as you have in celiac disease. I have atypical symptoms, but many people have gastrointestinal symptoms. They'll have, we just had a patient yesterday, who talked about mouth lesions. You know, she had blisters or canker sores or whatever in her mouth that was so painful that she couldn't eat. This was a 16-year-old. And she was then diagnosed with celiac disease. Well, that was how it manifested for her. For other people, they have horrible bloating and stomach aches and diarrhea or constipation. You might not have diarrhea. Not everybody has diarrhea. I think it's 40% of celiac sufferers, diagnosed celiac patients have typical symptoms. So that means 60% don't.
Yeah.
And I'm among those 60%. I didn't have typical symptoms. I had this rash. That's basically all I had. And looking back on it, I know my father had celiac disease too. In his later years, he developed an ataxia, which is like an imbalance. he lost his balance all the time and ended up falling a lot. And that can be a result of later untreated celiac disease.
Because it affects your nervous system, right?
It affects your nervous
Yeah.
system. And we didn't talk about this, but, well, we'll maybe talk about it later.
We'll
Never
talk
mind.
about it.
We'll talk about it in a little bit.
So
But-
tell us about celiac, because you're celiac, right?
Okay, celiac disease. So,
And she's celiac. I'm non-celiac gluten sensitive.
right.
So
And-
we're both parts of that spectrum.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you have celiac disease, a person who has celiac disease is like on the one end of the spectrum of allergic. So when I'm talking to people, waiters in restaurants or whatever, and they go, "Are you allergic to?" I'm like, "I'm very, very,
Oh,
very
yeah.
allergic."
Yeah.
And you can talk about it that way. What it really means is that what happens in my body is that when it encounters gluten, or actually the protein gliadin, it causes my body to mount an attack on the tissues in my body. So it destroys the villi in my small intestine, and villi are all these little, if we just had flat intestinal mucosa, we wouldn't be able to absorb nearly as much as if God made our mucosa like this. And in addition to that, it has little bitty ones all along these, and it has little hairs on all those. So we have lots of ability to absorb all our nutrients.
Fingers on fingers on fingers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what happens when I eat gluten, I don't have any ability to absorb anymore. And so then people that are untreated and have celiac disease in the end will be very nutrient deficient.
Yes.
And so they may have psychological issues. They may have,
It's everything.
everything.
Because every single system of your body is based on food, which means if you have malnutrition syndrome because of that, then your bones get weak, your muscles get weak, your repair slows down, your brain slows down, your hormones
skin
slows
looks
down,
bad.
you become infertile. Like every single system falls apart because every single system of your body is food, and then you're not getting those nutrients to replace those cells. And that's where I've had some really interesting patients where their files are like that thick. And then you're going through and you're just like, why is everything falling apart?
Everything.
And then it's just like the 20-year-old girl shouldn't be having broken fingers during soccer practice and like breaking this and breaking that and having all this problem and having her hair fall out. And like, she'd been to every specialist, and then, you see that like one doctor in the very beginning said celiac ? And then I followed up. I was like, well, was she celiac? And they said, well, no, that doctor left the practice and nobody ever followed up on
Nobody
it.
tested her.
And I'm like, well, at this point, I'm pretty sure that's what's going on. And she's not getting any nutrition, and her whole body's falling apart in her 20s. But I've seen case after case like that, where really it's that malabsorption throws everybody off because no one really thinks of gut stuff.
Right, and so like when you do not have, you can't absorb your minerals, you can't absorb the magnesium that you need for 200 different conversions in your body.
Mm-hmm.
You can't absorb the vitamin A that's going to keep that's going to keep your eyes functioning, so you get glasses, when you're a kid, and everything. You can't absorb anything.
Yeah.
And
in your first 18 inches of your small intestine, your duodenum, is where was it 80% of all your absorption comes from. And then you spend 22 feet getting the rest of the maximum absorption. But that's crazy. That first 18 inches is where it's just like pull nutrients, and then it's slowly pull nutrients, So it makes a huge difference.
so if you don't have celiac disease and you have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, the gluten will cause inflammation,
Yeah.
which also impedes absorption.
Yeah. In Harvard, they taught us that 1/50th of a slice of bread,
Right, which is a tiny little cube.
Yeah.
I've
like a
eventually.
little crouton.
Yeah.
So like, what's a crouton, right? Just one crouton. But it can decrease your absorption of your gut by 80%. Basically, if you take every cell in your small intestine and line it cell by cell by cell, it'll actually cover a whole entire football field. That's crazy, right? But that one tiny little crouton can then decrease the absorption down to one end zone.
Yeah. So like this to this is
Yeah.
football field to end zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's, and then it takes only a couple weeks really to try to get those things to grow back if you stop causing the problem.
So the crypts are what's on the bottom, and they take
And the bloods are up here. The crypts and the bloods.
the crypts.
Where's Latin Kings at?
I didn't grow up there. Okay, so it takes 2 weeks for these cells to, the cells at the bottom of these villi to regenerate. And actually they move up the villi to the top and then they're shed from the top. So I can tell that it takes about 2 weeks for me to get back to normal after, like, if I get stuff on my hands, this stuff. So I can assume that that's what's going on inside my small intestine also.
But only if patients quit.
Right.
Because what they do is any chronic condition you have is something you're chronically doing. And so then it's just like killing it off. Well, maybe a few days I'll just get it, lay off that and go back. And it's not enough time.
Right, because my clients all say, well, how's the whole gluten-free thing going, you know, when we start out. And they go,
Yeah.
well, I'm 90% gluten-free. Like, it's not gluten-free.
Yeah.
Gluten-free means 100% gluten-free. Because whether it's him that's sensitive or me that has an autoimmune disease, you have to quit because you never get back to absorbing, and you never get rid of all those symptoms if you don't quit 100%. And then we'll talk about
And our favorite patient took a year to stop waxing and waning.
oh, my son, should I say this?
That's a HIPAA violation. No, you can say it's your son.
Yeah, well, he didn't know. Well, you know, you tell a young person.
Just don't tell him which son.
No, not. You tell a young person who doesn't want to believe that they're mortal. You know, they're immortal, right? Don't eat gluten. What? I can't have pizza. I can't have burger buns. I can't have anything?
Yeah.
They're going to say, no. And so they'd be good for a while, but then you get invited to a party, but there's burgers, then you get invited out, and there's pizza, then you want a beer, by the way, has gluten. And so there would be this, like, we'd get better and worse and better and worse, and we actually see that with our people. Usually they're pretty good, and then they, but there was this birthday party, and I felt terrible. I'm like, no kidding, that's what happens.
It's always that mentality of like, hey, I feel pretty good now. All my rashes are gone. My gut's working. I'm probably fixed. And then they were like, I'll just have a little cake. It's
Little
like,
cake.
whoop, off the charts. Yeah.
Yeah. So that 1/50th of a slice of bread. I will also tell you a story that I learned the hard way. You can dip your fork in a sauce, a gravy, and lick that off, and it's enough.
Yeah, because it's just liquefied gluten. Yeah. Yeah, and condiments are, you know, there's so many things that have gluten that you wouldn't even expect, and we'll talk about those kind of frustrations too. That so you know, celiac is what's the population of celiac in America? Like
They
2%?
say it's 1 in 133 people, but I think that's an old figure, and that's also people that have been diagnosed. So I would say probably it's closer to 2% or more. And an interesting fact that we hadn't talked about is that they had some lab vials of inductees into the Army from the Korean War. And the blood was still good. They could still test it. And so they tested for celiac disease. And they found 1 in 133. And so the question is, well, but, you know, is celiac really increasing in incidence, or is it just that we're better at diagnosing it and we test more for it now? Which is probably also true, but they tested new inductees now that are young men now, and they found they have a higher incidence of celiac disease than they had in 1952 with the blood that they found there. And then they tested men who would be the same age as those men who were going into the Army in 1952, how old that is, and those men also have a higher incidence of celiac than that cohort did in 1952. So that means that we actually have developed celiac in that population to a higher degree than they had it when they were that age. So the answer is yes and yes. There was always celiac, probably there's evidence of celiac in Egyptian times, but it's a greater percentage now, and I'd say it's significant. But more people have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, although there's now evidence that celiac disease may be a continuum. You may start with non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and in 5 to 10 years you may be able to progress into celiac disease where it's actually attacking your body, which makes sense, really.
Right, because you go from like a primary molecular mimicry symptoms to a secondary molecular mimicry autoimmune.
Right.
So the same things you'll see with IBS trending towards Crohn's, or trending towards ulcerative colitis, and dermatitis then becoming eczema, psoriasis, right? The other thing too with that is I think pretty much everybody else, so that's 1 to 2% of the population. I think about the 98% of the rest of the population is just non-celiac gluten sensitive, right? So they're going to have delayed reactions to these, where celiac is like instant, right? And so that's more the immunoglobulin gamma that we always do testing for, and almost everybody comes up gluten and wheat.
Well, and depending, some people that have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, they eat that piece of cake at the wedding and they're like, I don't understand it, I got diarrhea the next day. But some people get bloating, within several hours. And some people, they're like, man, I got brain fog and I haven't eaten anything, but a couple of days ago I did. So for some people it's 4 to 6 hours. Some people it's a day. I would say most common it's about 24 hours, and then some people it takes a little longer.
And I think it takes longer to dissipate. So it's like here, and then it's slowly, and usually somewhere in there they hit another peak and keep.
Well, and if they keep doing it, it's just all forever, and that's where most people are at.
Yeah, and the testing now. Okay, so for celiac.
How do you know if you have celiac disease or not?
So celiac, you should have probably pretty severe reactions.
I didn't.
Well, that's right, because you're saying 60%. Okay, I'm a big liar. So I'm only speaking for the 40%. 60%, it's going to be more ambiguous.
We see more of the 40% because they have
a driving reason.
Really big reason to come. I didn't know I had anything wrong with me. My dad didn't know he had anything wrong with him.
So the standard testing, tissue transglutaminase antibodies. So tissue transglutaminase is an interesting thing, because tissue transglutaminase is what sets off celiac patients, but it's also what they glue meat together with to make deli meat. And so
deli meat.
So they take tissue transglutaminase derived from pig's blood, sprinkle it all over, they make it a powder, sprinkle it all over a bunch of scrap meat, compress it, refrigerate it for 2 to 4 hours, and it'll come out one solid piece of meat. It's called meat gluing.
And then they slice it in the deli and you eat it on your sandwiches.
But then people have celiac reactions, or even non-celiac gluten sensitivity reactions to meat. And they're like, dude, I gave up all that bread. I'm just eating lots of meat like a good American, or a good paleo person. But why the hell do I still have all these weird problems? And often it's because you're eating glued together meat with tissue transglutaminase.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. You can look this up and find videos on YouTube if you look up meat gluing. Yeah. And butchers cannot tell, because they not only do that in the deli meat, they also will do that for steaks. So if you have
getting ripped off.
Yeah, often if steaks are various pieces of steak that have been meat glued together, especially if they are perfectly.
Yeah, the tenderloins, they'll glue a bunch of pieces, cheaper pieces together.
Actually, butchers couldn't tell what had been done. So, know your farmer, or it should at least look like a T-bone if it is a steak.
The Chop House over here, the Anchor restaurant, right next door is the Chop House, where they butcher animals. You went there. We went there not too long ago. Yeah. But I noticed that their tenderloins and stuff, they literally just look like a big chunk of meat. Like, you can tell that's one real piece of meat, right? Yeah. But then when I look at stuff at like Dillon's and stuff, there's always bacon wrapped around it, so you can't really see whether it's like the textures match all the way through.
Yeah.
It's a big
So
scam.
it's good to know. Good to know your sources. So there's tissue transcontaminase, which is about 95% accurate. You say?
Yeah, so that's one of the best tests and the standard test. And then
there's endomysial antibodies, which is a big words. You know, you probably never heard that, but it's.
Do they always test that?
They should.
They should,
But
yeah.
sometimes it's a tiered thing, like they
panel.
give you one, and if your results a certain way, they'll give you another one, and yeah. So there are 10% of false positives with that. There's deaminated gliadin peptide. They test that because 2-3% of celiacs have so little immunoglobulin A. That sounds funny, but you can have a deficiency or a too little of it. If you don't have don't have enough of it, you won't get a positive when you should get a positive for some of the other tests. So yeah.
Talk about how. So I don't really do all that much testing because I just assume everybody should have problems with it, so stop eating it. But a lot of people have tested for it, and then there's always that thing that they want you to eat gluten.
Right.
So that the
that's the thing. With these tests, you have to have been eating gluten within a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
So if you've already gone gluten-free, these will not be accurate.
Yeah, and they'll be miserable to test the gluten.
And sometimes they want you to eat a couple of slices of bread every day for a couple of weeks or something like that. Different doctors tell you different things. I wouldn't do it. I would not do it.
So Kim says where you can get tested for celiac. So like we do that testing. Your primary does that testing.
Anybody can do
Everybody
that
does
testing.
that testing.
They just don't.
Yeah.
Typically. Because they don't know what to tell you. And honestly, a lot of times doctors will say, well, nobody's going to follow the diet anyway. I mean, if people are having really severe symptoms and they do the testing and they find out their stuff, they'll tell them. But they don't have the time like we do to really work with people and answer their questions and
meticulously go through what you can do.
and
like
even
all
if
the
you
solutions.
get sent to a nutritionist or a dietitian, often their philosophy is they're not as in-depth. They haven't studied it like we have. They don't know what we know. And so a lot of times the results aren't as good, and so doctors tend to think people aren't going to do well no matter what. They're just going to die.
Yeah, if you keep seeing people fail with it all the time, then you just assume, what's the point?
Now, one more thing we should say about testing is that the actual gold standard for determining if you have celiac or not is to actually do an endoscopy where they put the tube down with a camera and they look at the villi in your small intestine and to see if they're flattened or not. And if they're flattened, you get a diagnosis of celiac disease, and if they're not flattened, you get a non-celiac disease diagnosis, and then they say you're fine, whatever. But you could still have non-celiac gluten sensitivity and have all the same symptoms, and it would be reversed if you quit eating gluten, which is what we see with, like, they say 80% or more of Americans have some symptoms. They may not realize that their depression and their headaches and their stuff is gluten, but there's so many things that can be the result of eating gluten.
So your cheapest option in the beginning is assume you're like almost 100% of the population and you either have celiac or sensitivity and stop eating gluten. At least the modified one.
But if you're still eating gluten, or you know someone that's still eating gluten, have them tested with these lab tests at least. I personally would probably not do the endoscopy if I got positives on these lab tests. But if you were looking at something like, can I get disability, the insurance companies would probably require the endoscopy.
Yeah.
That's that. But
and then
what does it say?
Chris Davies. Yeah, so
I think those are excellent. I just have been studying both those books.
so the Whole30 and then the 21-day sugar.
But caveat, we're going to talk about milk. Milk is a huge cross-reactive, and so I can't remember. I think the Whole30 not allow it. But in any case, if either of those are saying, well, after 21 days, then you can start reintroducing milk. No, never. No.
Right, and that's part of the, I mean, again, part of the problem with our kind of like gimmick approach to what's the next new, like, complicated diet that I'm going to do to help, and usually it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but they always just end up going back to the same thing, or it's not sustainable.
You know, I don't even think, like, okay, you go
because
on the
Whole Foods good. I mean, it's pretty good,
the
I
Whole
think.
30. The Whole 30 is good, and so is a 21-day sugar detox. That is that San Filippo? That is Diane San Filippo, I
Dang,
believe. Yeah.
people be well read
And
here.
my favorite author on this subject is Sarah Ballantyne, the Paleo Mom, paleomom.com, and she wrote Autoimmune Paleo. She goes through a lot of really good explanation as to what autoimmune disease is and what gluten does to us in the first chapter of her book. It's pretty sciencey, and I like that, but I was going through very slowly and underlining about.
Yeah.
She's a PhD and she knows what she's talking about. So I would suggest reading her. How Not to Die.
Oh, yeah, that book came out.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
It
But it sounds like a good idea. How not
seems
to
like
die.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that.
Like
Yeah,
that.
when I was lecturing in Thailand, they were just like, everybody wants to live to 100, but what do you want to be at 100? What do you want to be at 80? What do you want to be at 60, right? And like the idea of not, like, how not to die. My generation's supposed to lose 28 years off our lifespan. We're supposed to be dying in our 50s and 60s. We now have people dying in their 20s and 30s, and kids having cancer before they're even 10 years old. Like,
A lot of kids.
yeah, our whole goal should be how not to die.
How not
But-
to die. Yeah. And so it's what we're talking about today is one little piece of that puzzle. There's a lot of other things. I mean, but this is something that a lot of healthy people don't want to face
Yeah.
because it is very impactful in your everyday life. And our goal today is just to talk about how important it really is to face this and consider what impact it would be having on you and your family. Yeah.
And apparently, this is part 1. So we're out of time.
We didn't get through our thing, Mr.
I know.
G.
I love doing this stuff, but I hope you guys love listening to it. But I love doing these shows, but holy crap, the time goes like that.
Yep, so what to do about it is part 2.
Right, so next week, same time, same
Well,
channel.
and there will be more. I mean, like, what? Okay, I have one more statistic for you. People, and I assume this is for non-celiac gluten sensitivity people too, but for celiac sufferers, they get diagnosed, if they're lucky, and they are told to go on a gluten-free diet. And so they do. They go on a gluten-free diet, and they are on a gluten-free diet for a year, and then they are re-examined. And 80% of them still have villus atrophy, which means their villi are this way. So that means that their gluten-free diet is not working. Why? And we're going to talk about that next time.
Boom.
And what to do about it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about delayed sensitivity testing,
Mm-hmm.
IgG stuff. So for the non-celiac gluten sensitivity, that's probably the more meaningful test. We'll talk about FDA labeling, like what does gluten-free mean, and then we'll talk about how to avoid gluten,
Yep.
cross reactions that will frustrate the hell out of you if you don't know these,
Yep.
and then gluten-free healthier grains. So again, options. So
And there's a continuum. Like, not everybody's me. Not everybody's him. Some of you can eat non-gluten grains.
Yeah.
Some of you can't. Some of you, you're going to have to go with other healthy stuff. And so we'll talk about that.
Yeah, and that's the nice thing. So same thing in practice, always giving people 20 different options. So this one works with these people, this one works with these people, but there's solutions, which is great. So, hey Gina, and
Julie.
Julie's
Hi.
there.
Miss you,
Aw,
Julie.
see Julia. And then we'll talk about so the healthier options, and then we'll maybe talk about some of the other actual, say, gluten grains that you may be able to eventually switch to that shouldn't cause problems. Maybe. I like that look. I said that and she's like, So, maybe, but we'll talk about that. And then one thing we should add, if we have time, or maybe do another show on, is what about animals? Because I have these cats, And that one cat's puking all the time, and I get the gluten-free or grain-free, and I don't know what the hell to get them. And then I'm like, I don't even know.
Your animals are not designed to eat
Gluten.
grains.
Yeah.
Well, especially cats.
So we might touch on that too if we want to.
And
Because typically people will care more about their pets than they do themselves.
Well, you don't want your cats barfing up all over your bed.
Barfing over. No, and I got this new cat food, and I don't know why. I just say, oh, try this one, and it looks healthy. But again, they're cats. Like, they should be fine.
I can help you.
They
I
should be
can
fine.
help you with healthier cat foods.
So this last time,
and dog foods.
I got a new one, and no throwing up yet. So it's pretty good so far.
And there's another thing that I want to talk about.
Oh, let's have that.
And that is, are we destined from our genetics to get these autoimmune diseases? Or are there things that we think in our brain that might make us more susceptible to autoimmunity?
Predetermined
Yeah.
or susceptible?
And the answer is,
No, don't tell them the answer. Don't tell them the answer.
there are things we can do, and we can do better.
You have to pay attention. You have to watch episode 2, or we're not gonna. You never know what the real answer is.
Right.
All right. So thank you guys. I really appreciate you guys being a part of this. Please share this with your friends and family. I'm gonna try to figure out how to start making for 2020 these on podcasts, and also trying to get it on the YouTube channel so you guys don't have to dig around on Facebook and try to figure out where the hell the videos are.
Because there's a lot of stuff on his Facebook.
Maybe naming them. I don't know. There's like 160 episodes, and none of them are really named, and they're intermixed
Naming
together.
would be good.
Yeah, so.
Okay, well, we'll let you go.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye, you guys.
Bye.